Welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management, a weekly conversation with area leaders about how to persevere during uncertain times. Now here's your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi, and welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. Good to have you listening along today. Our program is brought to you by Worth Wealth Management. I have a special guest from Fort Hays State University today. When you talk about leaders, leaders like to read, and leaders also will write some books. And so we have a guest that's written a book about leadership and how you do that. So our guest is Dr. Angela Pool-Funai, who is with Fort Hays State University. She is the Assistant Provost for Academic Programs and Dean of Graduate and Office Scholarship and Sponsored Projects. That's a real name there, Angela. Good to have you on our program.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
Well, we talk with people who lead through challenging times, and obviously we've been through at the school systems, both in the regular school systems and now in universities. You're a part of the leadership program at Fort Hays State University. Tell us exactly what your job entails.
It depends on the day, honestly, but with my assistant provost hat, I deal a lot with curriculum. So new programs, new courses, changes to programs and courses, making sure that gets through the system and the necessary approvals with the state and accrediting bodies. Then with the grad school, I have the opportunity to work with more than 24 graduate programs across campus, our graduate council, which is our faculty leadership that helps us develop graduate policies and so forth. And then as with any position, other duties as assigned, everyone pitches in, we all hands on deck. And then my academic appointment is in the sociology program, which is part of the newly combined School of Leadership Studies, Sociology, Criminal Justice.
So what's your background? What brings you to Fort Hays State? It's interesting. Fort Hays State is really such a gem in Kansas as far as people that come here from around the world to participate and help students in this area succeed. What's your background? How did you get here?
A bit of a circuitous route, honestly. I became a faculty member the year I turned 40. So I had a whole first career in grant administration, research administration, grant writing, fundraising. And then in my late 30s, decided it was time to go back to school. And so I completed my graduate education and joined the dark side, as I like to joke, and became a faculty member. And so I feel like that background as a staff member and in the nonprofit world really lends a lot of perspective to my work here, and in a lot of ways has contributed to the things I enjoy researching and writing about.
One of the things we want to talk about is a book that you have out. You co-authored a book, and it's called The Reflective Administrator. And one of the things and then it goes on, a leader-centered focus. So it's interesting when we talk about leadership on this program, what it takes, but what is this book about? Then when you say a leader-centered focus? Right.
No, I appreciate you asking that. So reflection as a practice is something that the higher ed community has been aware of since, well back into the 1980s. In terms of experiential learning, things like internships, practicums, field studies. We've known for a long time that reflection is really important in the learning process, but especially for those of us who work in the public sector, in higher ed, in government, in healthcare, in law enforcement, all the above, dealing with the public, I felt like it was really important that we began to consider these tools that we learn in the classroom and how they can apply into the public setting. So my co-author, Dr. Tony Summers, he and I have known each other since the mid to late 90s. We worked together for a number of years back in Dallas, Texas, when we both lived there. And we reconnected a few years back and realized that our research, even though our careers had taken slightly different paths, our research was really centered on this idea of reflective practice as a professional tool, not just as a learning tool. And that's really how the idea for the book came about. It's taking these things that we know work really well in the classroom and how can we use them to become better leaders and to improve our communities.
Well, I pulled it up on Amazon because you can buy this book on Amazon. I'll have to get a signed copy from you of it, but it looks interesting. It looks interesting. I'm going to take a side route. Was it fun to go on internet and see a book that you'd written right there on Amazon? Yes. Was that cool?
Absolutely. Being able to create your own author page, it's very validating.
So, who is the book focused towards? Is it CEOs that are out there?
So our target focus of the folks we really want to try to impact are people who work in the public sector or students who are learning about these careers that you can have in the nonprofit world, in public policy, and in higher ed. But also, these principles really do cover the gamut across the sectors. So the focus is really toward public sector, but our hope is that individuals in the corporate world will also find it valuable.
If someone reads the book, what will the key points be that they come and learn from the book?
Our hope is that it's immediately applicable. So every chapter ends with a case study, and we were really deliberate about picking examples from all across. They're not all just education. There's healthcare, there's law enforcement, there's all kinds of different environments where even if that's not your field or your discipline, you might could put yourself in that person's shoes and think about the scenario that's been presented. And then each chapter has 2 or 3 what we call mirror moments because it's about reflection. And those could be used as either just thought prompts as you're reading it for your own personal development or for a discussion if you're using it in a classroom.
When you were writing the book, first, was it, sometimes you'll have people that just write the book, they sit down and write. You wrote it with a partner and co-authored the book. Was that fun or was that a challenge to kind of share those ideas and then get 2 different views coming into a book?
Absolutely. That's a terrific question. It was a lot of fun, but it was also quite a challenge because not only were we working together, but we're in different time zones. When we first started working this, I was still in Utah, so I was on Mountain Time. Tony is on the East Coast, so he's on Atlantic or Eastern time zone. And so trying to coordinate Zoom calls and emails and so forth. But we talked at least once a week. As we got closer, it became maybe every day or 2, we would just touch base. And as the project unfolded, we started with an outline that I had actually kind of developed the framework for before we started working together. And then we talked through it. This area is really more your expertise. Why don't you take the lead on this? I'll take the lead on this one. And it really, honestly, it just naturally fell into place where we ended up taking the lead on most chapters individually, but then we would share the documents together and give feedback and other examples for each other. So I was really pleased with how the workload ended up divvying up.
There may be some business people listening here, but is this a academic book or is it a leadership book?
That is another good question. I would like to say it's both. One of the things that we really tried to focus on is to make it readable. I've had a couple of really well-meaning friends say, oh, that sounds like a great book, but I don't think I could ever read it. And I said, well, why not? We don't use jargon. We don't use academic words. We want this to be approachable. We want a student to pick this up and not dread reading it. We want someone who's working, a practitioner, someone who's working out in the field. They don't have the time to read a 300-page manual of academic talk, but maybe they'll pick up a 180-page book that they can read along and find some application to their real world, things that they're dealing with right then.
So what's been the experience of selling the book so far? Have you had to go out and do book signings and all those things that most book publishers want you out signing books, doing this, making an effort out there? Have you had to do some of that?
A little bit, but part of that's been on our own and with our own time. So I have had the chance to participate in the Hayes Public Library, did an author's fair this summer, and I got to go to that. It was actually the weekend after the book was published, so that was very exciting. Routledge Press has offices here in the US and abroad, so they do some marketing on their own, but their marketing is really more geared to the education side of things. So they'll market it professional conferences and things of that nature. But Tony and I are more responsible for our, local efforts and getting the word out among our networks.
Well, you guys probably have a pretty good network within the academic world for getting that done and being able to do what you do like at the library is get out and be able to do that. Is there a next book coming now that you've done this? I always like books that have a lot of pictures in it, but,
this one has a few charts and graphics.
Good. So is there another book coming?
So this was my second book, and I started working on it pretty quickly after I finished the first one. And so I committed to myself that I would give myself one academic year just to write for fun. I have some fiction projects that I put on the back burner for a while that there's no pressure to ever publish them, but they're just things I want to write just because it's I love to write. It's fun for me. And so that's an outlet. It's a way I de-stress. But right now there's nothing new on the burner in terms of a new academic publication.
So what would you write fiction-wise? What would your book be about?
Oh, I've got a couple of novels that I've been thinking through, kind of a suspense, maybe a little romance, but again, it's just for me, it's just the act of pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, and it's a very good outlet for me.
Very good. I want to find out how people can get your book. Do that. We're going to take a quick break here and talk about that and talk a little bit about the school year and what you kind of see going forward to the school year in your job and what you see happening at Fort Hays State. Our guest today is Dr. Angela Pool-Funai, who's with Fort Hays State University, and we're talking about leadership and how you can get better at it. Back with more after this.
The most successful investors are those that can keep their emotions in check and take a longer-term view at what portfolios will be worth 3 to 5 years down the road. I'd say that's the most important in determining what investor outcomes are. Market corrections will continue in the future. We've seen many of them over the years, only to see equity prices rise higher, and that'll be the case in the future.
Worth Wealth Management, enhancing lives and strengthening families.
Our guest today on Forward Ever is Dr. Angela Pool-Funai at Fort Hays State University. She is the Assistant Provost for Academic Programs and Dean of the Graduate and Office of Scholarship and Sponsorship Projects. That's a lot in the title. A lot goes on. So before we ask about how you get your book, tell me about the school year. What's your typical day like at the school at Fort Hays State as you start a brand new semester?
Absolutely. Well, this year is a little bit different because, as a lot of folks know, it's really important for a college or university to be accredited. And we are accredited through an organization called the Higher Learning Commission, or HLC. And every 10 years, a university goes through a comprehensive review to make sure that we continue to do the same things that we say we're going to do. And so that's this year. So for the past year and a half almost at this point, we have been putting together a huge narrative report, all kinds of evidence files. All of that is due to HLC next month, actually. And then we'll have a team of site visitors come in late October, visit our campus. And the message I've been trying to share with my colleagues and students on campus is accreditation can feel a little scary because they're coming to evaluate us. But at the same time, this is a chance to celebrate. Fort Hays has done a lot of really remarkable things over the last decade, and that's our chance to tell our story. So that's going to take up the bulk of my time this semester, is preparing for that accreditation and getting that going.
Is there your book's about the reflective administrator. Is there a reflective process that's involved as you go through this accreditation?
Oh, goodness, absolutely. And a lot of what we're doing now is there's 3 types of reflective practice. And the second one is reflection on action. We're thinking back. It's that hindsight 2020 type of thing. What have we done? What have we learned from what we've done? And thinking in terms of the accreditation, they don't expect us to be perfect. In fact, if we tried to paint ourselves as perfect, they would suspect we're not being forthcoming, right? So then we have to think about, what are we doing to improve? That's that forward-thinking reflective practice that we talk about in the book, reflection for action. How have we taken what we've learned? How are we going to make improvements for the future?
Sounds interesting. Where do we go to find your book? Is it down on campus? Do you carry a book bag around and sell them out of your book bag? How do we find your book?
I don't personally have any copies on me at the moment, but it is available on Amazon, as you mentioned earlier. It's also available directly through the publisher, which is Routledge Press. It's a Taylor Francis imprint, and it's available through their website. I think right now they have free shipping, in fact, but those are the 2 main sites. There may be other digital booksellers that it's available to as well.
I understand it's available on your Kindle if you want to
Yes.
read it that way. Do you like to read books on Kindle?
I love reading fiction books on Kindle. I'm a scribbler, so I like nonfiction books to have a hard copy so I can write in them.
One question I always like to ask people who are involved with leadership is, where did you pick up your leadership skills? Where did you really learn about reflective leaders? And
Oh,
where'd you come up with this?
oh, that's a wonderful question. I will say there have been so many influences positively in my life, but two things I can think of specifically that have pushed me forward to where I am today. And one would be my 6th grade English teacher, Mrs. Betty Capel, who took a very, very shy young lady who would cry every time she had to stand in front of the classroom and pushed me to keep doing those things. And she was the very first person, besides my mama, who told me that I was a good writer. In fact, she asked to keep some of my assignments to share for her class next year. I could win a Pulitzer Prize one day, and I don't think it would ever mean as much as her asking to keep my work as an example. So that was definitely an early on push for me. And honestly, the second one is my professional relationship with my co-author, Dr. Tony Summers. When we worked together in the late 90s, he was my supervisor. He worked as a vice president for, I don't remember his exact title, but basically student affairs, student engagement. And he entrusted me with my first supervisory position and gave me a lot of responsibility and really was a huge mentor in my life. And so being able to work with him again all these years later has been a real joy.
Well, if someone's out listening to the program, they want to check this out, go and look for it's called The Reflective Administrator, a leader-centered focus. And Angela, great job of putting this together. Nice job of what you're doing at Fort Hays State University.
Thank you.
Proud of the university and all they do. And look forward to meeting you in person sometime and
Absolutely.
having a chance to look at your book. It sounds like there's some interesting things there.
Thank you. And I'll be happy to autograph it for you anytime.
I would love to have that. Our guest today on the program, Dr. Angela Pool-Funai, Fort Hays State University. She's Assistant Provost for Academic Programs and Dean of Graduate and the Office of Scholarship and Sponsorship Projects at Fort Hays State University. A big title, a big job. And Angela, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Forward Ever. Leading in Challenging Times is brought to you by Worth Wealth Management. Thanks for listening. I'm Gary Shorman.
Thanks for joining us for Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management. Join us right here next week for another episode with host Gary Shorman. Until then, remember to move forward ever, backward never.